Welcome to Bioethics in the Margins. We are a group of bioethicists from different institutions across the country. This podcast represents our views and those of our guests, but we do not speak for our universities or medical centers, nor for any formalized bioethics organizations. Our mission is to bring marginalized topics and voices into the bioethics discourse. This podcast is hosted by Dr. Amelia Barwise, Associate Professor of Medicine and Assistant Professor of Biomedical Ethics at the Mayo Clinic, and Dr. Kirk Johnson, Assistant Professor of Justice Studies and Medical Humanities at Montclair State University. Please enjoy this conversation.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Bioethics in the Margins. We're so excited to have Dr. Donald Carter III, who is Assistant Professor of Bioethics and Medical Humanities at Mercer School of Medicine. He has a really impressive background, a Bachelor's of Arts in Music at HBCU, Fisk University, a Master in Business Administration from Tennessee State University, a Master of Divinity in Vanderbilt University, and a Doctor of Bioethics at Loyola University Chicago. He also was a Sadler Scholar at the Hastings Center. He is currently the newly minted co-chair of the Race Affinity Group of the American Society for Bioethics and Humanities. Dr. Carter's research interests have included clinical medical ethics, organ transplant ethics, theological ethics, artificial intelligence within medicine, race and social justice, and medical humanities. As I mentioned previously, he's a member of the American Society for Bioethics and Humanities, and also part of the Healthcare Ethics Consortium. So welcome, Dr. Carter. We're so excited to have you today.
Thank you. I almost didn't recognize who you were talking about. I never really kind of think about those things. I just kind of live my life. So thank you for having me today, and thank you for this opportunity.
Oh, absolutely. And thank you for joining us. We're really interested in picking your brain about different issues within your sphere of research here. So first and foremost, as I read, you have a unique background. So please tell us about your interdisciplinary background more specifically, and how it led you into this field of bioethics.
Sure. So the short version, my father was a respiratory therapist, and instead of going to daycare, I would either spend time with my grandparents or I would spend a lot of time with him. And I grew up in a town called Fort Smith, Arkansas, which is on the borderline of Arkansas and Oklahoma. And so he would go off into the rural areas of Oklahoma often and would take me with him so he can change and clean the trachs of the patients out in those rural towns. And so I would be outside playing with the ducks and the chickens and things of nature on people's property while he was in there, assessing the patients. Or I would go to the hospital with him and be his, quote unquote special helper, carrying around his stethoscope and speaking to the patient's family and the patient and running up and down the corridors of the hospital. So I definitely grew up in healthcare, literally. And so I have very fond memories of just always being around medicine and people who were operating in that. He wanted me to be a doctor, of course, and I could never really handle the idea of possibly losing someone, right? And so I said, well, how can I be a part of this, but not have that type of responsibility? And so what ended up happening was my first job was working in the kitchen at the hospital, just serving plates and food to the patients. And so I did that right up until college. I wanted to do music. And so I always had this dream that I'd be touring the world and doing background work for various artists. And after I got tired of living out of suitcases, I would then come back and I would teach. So I went to Fisk University and majored in music and did get into the music scene and really did enjoy that. But as all artists recognize, until you're actually making the money, you're broke. And so I needed to be able to find something that would kind of float me and pay my bills. And so I ended up getting a job in hospital administration as an administrative assistant. Did that for quite some time and was still looking to try to make some more money. So I was told by administrators, hey, I don't know exactly what you would do with your degree in music here, but why don't you turn around and get your MBA? And so I went to Tennessee State in the evening to get the MBA. And while I was doing that, I was still somewhat performing on the side. And my vocal teacher at the time said, "Hey, to float you some extra money, there is this internship at the church if you're interested in working there." And having grown up in church, any way that I can possibly serve is wonderful. But if you're going to also pay me to serve, I'm there. And so I went over to the internship, and after working with the pastor for quite some time, she asked me, "Have you ever considered going to divinity school?" And I had told her that it had crossed my mind, but there was nothing in my immediate plans that placed me there. Again, I wanted to be a musician. I wanted to be, somewhere singing, somewhere performing. And she told me, "I think that you should definitely think about applying." And so I have this thing of not really wanting to tell pastors no, kind of scared about that. So I just figured that I will go ahead and be obedient and I'll apply. The school itself would tell me no. To my surprise, they told me yes. And so part of the issue was that they didn't offer classes in the evenings or on the weekends. They were during the day. And so I was able to work out with my boss, since the divinity school was right across the campus, to go on my lunch break to attend divinity courses. So I'll be working during the day in hospital administration, and then during my lunch break, would go over to the divinity school and take courses. So I did that for 3 years. And part of the program was that I take an ethics course. In that ethics course, they had medical students with the divinity students and education students, and they gave us case studies. And I found it very interesting of how we all wanted to help the patient within the case study, but based on our profession, we approached it differently. And I was able to recognize that due to my training as a divinity student, I was trained to look at the spiritual needs and the mental needs of the patient, whereas the doctors, the residents, were trained to look at the physical needs of the patient and their mental needs. But what we both were missing was a piece. And so if we as human beings are mind, body, and spirit, right, how do we ensure that when we're talking about healthcare and moving our patient to a holistic wellness standpoint, how do we do that if we're not trained to touch the mind, body, and the spirit, all three things at one time? And I was interested in how our collaborations helped us achieve that. I needed the medical students because I'm not trained with the physical portion of that treatment plan, whereas the residents needed us for the spiritual component. And so I asked the professor, "What is this thing? This is what I'm interested in. This is where my heart kind of leads me to." And he told me that this thing is called bioethics. And so I said, "No, how do I make that a career?" And that's how I ended up going to Loyola University of Chicago. And I graduated right in the smack dab of the pandemic. And so thankfully, the program had been established for numerous years and knew how to work around technology. And so we were not interrupted with that. But it was a very interesting time to be in a bioethics program during a pandemic. And so that's how I kind of got to where I am today. It's just a series of, you get one place, have a conversation, and it kind of points you in the next direction. And looking back at it, it all makes sense, but I wouldn't have been able to plan it on my own. It's just the way that life ended up happening.
Oh, very interesting. If you go into a little bit more detail, because obviously starting a PhD program in general is taxing and challenging. And then you add, once in every century pandemic on top of that. What was that experience like? I'm really curious on what was the structure. Were you able to finally meet your colleagues, your classmates that you took these classes with? Can you just share a little bit about your experience regarding your PhD journey?
Absolutely. First things first, though, because I don't want to seem as if I'm misleading people. Loyola does not offer a PhD. They offer a doctorate of bioethics. And so I don't have a PhD, although I am trained in research. And also, too, their program has been online since they began the program. And so they were already, well versed with how to do an entire doctorate program via technology, whereas the other institutions were trying to catch up. So the only thing that we kind of missed out on is during their summer courses, they would require that the students from wherever you are, if you're still within the U.S., to come in to the campus for about 2 weeks and take a course together so that you can be with your cohort. But of course, we weren't allowed to do that given the restrictions that were placed upon us. So outside of that, nothing would have been different from any other cohort before the pandemic that they had. For me, it was interesting because even before the pandemic, a lot of your courses every once in a while had moved to an online platform. So you were used to the chat rooms and you were used to the writing in the discussion boards and everything else. I will say that there is a difference of not being able to have a conversation with someone face to face, being able to sit across from them. But we don't feel like I don't feel like I missed out on anything. As far as the pandemic component, because a vast majority of my colleagues in my cohort were nurses and doctors, they were somewhat absent from classes and things, which was understandable, right? You're on the front lines doing all this work. And so I'm sure for them, they had to cut back hours as to how they maneuvered in the program. But it always led for great discussion as to, yes, we're talking about the case reports and everything else in the books that we have, but what are you actually seeing right now? And so it was good to be able to talk about things in live time as they were unfolding and be able to enter those into the discussion. So I really do thank the faculty and the administrators who were able to pivot quickly and to be able to use what we are actually experiencing to our benefit. To talk about, some of the ethical issues. And I also think that helped us move beyond the traditional conversations that we typically have in bioethics, because we had to talk about things that had never happened before, or new ethical dilemmas that we had never even dreamed or imagined that we will encounter. And so I think that is what kind of, forced us in the direction of, hey, there are so many other things that we can have conversations about. Yes, the standards are important, such as informed consent and such as, competence versus capacity. But what about all these other things over here? And so I do think that was, if you want to say, one of the beautiful things that came out of that time is us learning how to pivot and us learning how to expand our conversations.
Oh, absolutely, and thank you for the clarification and your experience. Really interesting. It's always compelling to hear different colleagues' experiences, whether they're in doctoral work, like you clarified yourself, PhD work, or just in general during that time of COVID and trying to navigate, not just personally, but also professionally as well. And speaking about pivoting, I'd like to pivot into a fantastic piece that you're currently working on in regards to the Flexner report. And for those that do not know or familiar with the Flexner report, can you explain what is the report itself and how it shaped medical education?
Absolutely. The Flexner report was released in 1910 by a man named Abraham Flexner. The report is believed to be responsible for establishing a standard in regard to medical training. Flexner was a high school teacher who majored in classics, which would be better known as philosophy today. He had never taught within medical school or served as a medical student. In fact, I think I have read that it's possible that he had never even been inside of a medical school. Yet he was tapped to clean up medical education, many of which were for-profit institutions. So if you were able to pay the fee, you could get the piece of paper and essentially, become a doctor at that time. During this time period, there was a lack of standard across the nation within the medical schools. So with everyone doing whatever they wanted to do, how do we ensure that students are adequately trained and that the patients that they are encountering are actually safe? And how do we stop everyday persons from just attempting to open medical schools across the nation without any kind of training or any kind of medical background? And so Flexner was tapped to basically tackle this particular issue. And so history records that Flexner believed that Johns Hopkins University was the best model and used that as the standard for all medical schools to be formed. And so what he did was that he went around the nation evaluating all of the medical schools that were currently in operation. And for those who did not meet that standard that Johns Hopkins had set, and we're talking about at this time, Johns Hopkins was one of the few, if not only, that was requiring that their students have some kind of college education before going into medical school. If you didn't have that, if you didn't have facilities that he thought was up to code or a curriculum that he thought was up to code, then he did recommend that you close your facilities. And the Flexner report ended up recommending that 75% of the operating medical schools at the time closed their doors, that they didn't meet the gold standard. And so the academic model that we have today is based on that report as to this is the way that your curriculum should be formed. This is the way and the standards that your facilities should be laid out in your laboratories. And so for a lot of us, we have him to thank today as to how we look at medical education.
Thank you for explaining that and the consequences of that. Can you speak a bit about historically black colleges and universities, HBCUs, and how many of them have medical schools and that type of thing, and what you think their role is in medicine more generally?
Sure, and thank you for that question. Well, kind of going back to kind of go forward, again, we have the Flexner report to thank for how we model our medical schools today, but also, too, there is a dark side of that people normally don't talk about that much. On one hand, the Flexner report did help society. I just attended a lecture last week where the speaker went on and on about the Flexner report and how we should thank him and his legacy. But I think it's rarely talked about the negative impact that the report had on minorities. At the time, Blacks were not allowed to enroll into some of these schools. Thus, they created their own institutions to serve the underrepresented. But these schools didn't have much funding. Therefore, if you are measuring all the institutions, including those for the minorities, to the standard of Johns Hopkins, then you've already set them up to fail, right? You may be acting fairly by measuring all the institutions to the same school, but these Black institutions do not have the same opportunities as far as funding as the other institutions that you were evaluating. And so when we talk about that 75% that closed, within that 75% at the time, there were 7 institutions that were designed just for minorities. And out of that 7, he recommended that 5 close. The 2 remaining were Howard University College of Medicine and Meharry Medical College. And researchers believe that the closures reduced the production of Black doctors by an estimated 10,000 to 30,000 over the following century. Since the report was delivered about 100 years ago, we've only had 2 additional schools to be added to those 2, and that's Morehouse School of Medicine and Charles R. Drew University of Medicine and Science. So we now currently have a total of 4 HBCU medical schools, and I just got wind that Xavier University in New Orleans is planning to open another within the next couple of years. So that will put us to a total of 5. And this is significant because statistics show that at least 70% of our Black doctors at some point within their education career has attended an HBCU. And HBCUs only make up 2% of all colleges and universities in the U.S. So according to, I believe it's the Health Resources and Services Administration, life expectancy among Black people increased on an average of almost 31 days for every 10% increase of representation of Black primary care physicians. So if these HBCU medical schools are producing such large numbers of physicians, they are a major player in how we are treating our communities for the better.
Absolutely. And thank you for highlighting some of the negative impacts of that report and how it's obviously taking a while to get back up to those numbers again. We still haven't reached the 7 schools that were present in 1910. So, we completely agree about, we want to diversify clinicians to reduce the impact of implicit bias and structural racism and all those things that exist in medicine. But your focus is also on trying to diversify bioethics generally and the clinical bioethicists so they can have an impact, on that work at the bedside. So how do you think we can sort of diversify clinical ethicists?
I don't believe that there is one solution that fixes the problem. However, I do suggest that we start by being more open and more welcoming. I've only attended about 3 annual conferences held by American Society of Bioethics and Humanities, known as ASBH. The first one was basically older professionals, not many minorities of any kind of sort. But over the years, that has changed drastically. I was sharing with a colleague not too long ago that this last gathering was full of diversity. And when I say diversity, I'm not just talking about just race and ethnicity. It was full of different ages, different types of creed that people subscribe to. And so I think that that's wonderful. And so for me, it's for those who have been under the large umbrella of bioethics for years, if not decades, it's learning that we need to make space, scoot down some. There's room at the table for other people to allow them to bring in their various opinions and their different backgrounds and how they see the world. When we talk about clinical ethics, it's understanding that our patients come from a piece of all of these different communities. And so you want to have someone who is a representative or can speak to or has some kind of understanding of the various different communities that are out there. And so it's important that representation be brought in to diversify our ethics committees. I think that studies show that given that to be totally trained in clinical ethics, you have to have at least a master's degree, preferably a doctorate degree. And then once you have done a fellowship program and done all these certifications, that excludes a lot of people. And so majority of our clinical ethicists who are serving in our hospitals are physicians. And because of that, we're in the medical curriculum that we really train you to be ethicists. And so I think that's important that we bring into these institutions departments that really focus on what does it mean to be an ethicist, to give you some formal training so that you know exactly how to first recognize an ethical dilemma, but also how to kind of talk through and process that. And so when we talk about HBCUs, out of the 4 medical schools that I previously listed, none of them have a department of bioethics or anything like that. Now, within their curriculums, they do teach ethics courses. Some of them may even have electives for people to take. And I know that Howard University has a undergraduate degree program in bioethics. But as far as a master's degree for them to be able to continue their studies there, it's not there. And also, too, it was brought to my attention after doing some research that some medical schools within the U.S. require that their students have some kind of ethics course before they get into a medical program. None of the 4 actually required their students to do that. Charles R. Drew was the only one that recommended that their student have taken an ethics course. And so I am proposing that we create departments of bioethics so that, again, if we know that so many Black doctors are coming out of these institutions, let's equip these people to be able to go into those institutions ready to hit the ground running, to be able to serve on ethics committees, if not lead them, and be able to represent the communities from which they've come. Understanding that when we talk about HBCUs, it's not just African Americans, other minorities and other majorities are all welcome to those institutions. And so it's a melting pot for everybody. So when you educate one, you're possibly educating them all. And although this conversation should be had at on a larger platform, as far as all medical schools in the U.S. should have bioethics programs, I'm choosing to focus on this paper just on HBCUs because that is an area that we very rarely talk about in any of our spaces. And so I think that they are a resource that could be used more than what they are.
Yeah, really important and profound perspective, Dr. Carter, because, of course, as we know, representation matters, and there's not nearly enough, not just Black doctors, but also Hispanic doctors as well, that reflect the general population of our country, of our society. And it's important to have, as you mentioned previously, an array of representation because, you could be the smartest doctor in the world, could have all of the degrees, credentials, certifications, but nothing really could teach about lived experience, right? Nobody could really teach about living in the shoes of, Latinx person, Hispanic person, a black individual, an Asian Pacific Islander individual, right? That lived experience is something that I think that is definitely needed and needs to be welcome and valued in the area of bioethics. So really a profound and important proposal that you just shared with us. So thank you for that. I'm also curious because I'm a medical humanist by training. So what dynamic of medical humanities, the humanism in medicine you think is also important in this discussion? Number one, I guess, for bioethics, but also in HBCUs. I know bioethics is needed, as you alluded to earlier, in HBCUs, but also the dynamic of medical humanities and how we should embrace the humanities within medicine as well. So I'm just interested on your thoughts on that.
Absolutely. So I'm currently at Mercer University within their medical school. And one thing that we do that involves the medical humanities is that we offer our students what is called visual training strategies, VTS for short. And in that particular curriculum, we take our medical students right before they go into clerkships to museums. And what we do is that we have them look at artwork. And we ask them, what do you see? Or we'll ask them, if someone could not see, how would you describe what you're looking at in front of you? And at first they'll say, I see a picture of a woman. But when you press them for more and more information, then by the time you get to maybe the third or fourth painting, I see a person who seems depressed. I'm looking at how she slumped down. She looked like she may be tired. I wonder if she had a long day from work. They go into all these details about what it is that they see. And then they go back and forth. And based on what someone else says, then, you look back at the painting and you may say, oh, I didn't see that before until you brought that to my attention. Thank you so much. And what the students learn later on is that sometimes you can be looking at something, but if you're not paying attention or slowing down to see what it is that you're looking at, you miss all the cues, right? And I think that we do a good job at teaching our students about becoming doctors in the first 2 years, about this is that, this is what this means, this is where this is located within the body and everything else. But then they're so book focused that they lose the ability to look at people and be able to see them as human beings outside of just subjects or just the patients that they're treating. And so we try to tell them all the time that your patients are more than just lab results. They're more than just, what the textbook says about them. They are individuals. They're moms, they're dads, they're grandparents. They're people with dreams, people with hopes, people who want to return back to work, people who want to be able to, run again and play with their grandkids on the ground. And so I think that it's important that we do that. And so I'm happy with the exercise that we give them, because students start to learn that when I go into the clerkships, when I go into the clinics, to put down the notepad and actually look at my patient. Listen to what they're saying, but also listen to what they're not saying. If they have children with them, oh, okay, well, I see you have your son with you today. Do you have, care for him? Do you have transportation to get to and fro? Because then that also might tell you more about the patient and their story. And so it's learning how to pay attention and how to see people. And so I think that that's something that should be implemented on all schools, not just, in those who have the money to pay for those programs. And what I've learned is that sometimes your local museums or art historians will offer those services for free. It's just you reaching out to them and having conversation to say, hey, is there some way we can partner with you to try to implement something? And then also, too, the students enjoy it. It also teaches them how to promote and like and appreciate art, and how they start to view art just beyond the surface. And I see a lot of my students who, even after the course is over, say that, they want to incorporate going to museums into their regular schedules outside of the classroom. And so as they are traveling to and fro on their breaks, they say, I'll stop at a museum just to see what's going on and have discussions about what is it I see. So I think that the arts has a way of returning us back to a place where we can start seeing each other again, just beyond the numbers in the lab work, that you are a human at the end of the day who has these desires like anybody else to live a full and bountiful life. And so how do we get you back to that, or at least as close to that as possible, given your particular circumstances? And I think that the humanities is a wonderful way to do that, whether it be art, music, dance, or, theater. The arts has a way of reminding us about our humanity that I think is important, that we sometimes get lost in the shuffle.
That sounds wonderful, that program. Yeah, and I think the humanities fabulous for clinicians and people working in hospitals and clinics, and then also for patients as well. I think there's work going on at Mayo to try and give patients access to those type of programs to help their healing. So can you tell us about some developments that you're seeing in the field of bioethics, things you're encouraged about? You said that you've been to the conference and it looks like it's becoming a lot more diverse. And, that's great news. You're pushing for these programs and HBCUs. Are there other things that you're excited about and that you feel are positive changes within the field of bioethics?
Yeah, I think that, again, this last conference is a sign that something is changing. And I think it's changing for the better. Because I am now the co-chair of the Race Affinity Group, I have access, and I guess you can call it privilege, to a lot of people's stories and their feelings and sometimes even their pain and their trauma, of not always feeling welcomed, or having a love for something but feel as if it doesn't love you back. And so how do we make sure that we bring those people into the fold? Because the tent of bioethics, we always talk about it, is so large. Surely there is room for everybody, no matter where you come from and no matter what your interests are, under this tent. And I think that because we are such a large tent, that is our superpower. And so this past conference gave me hope that, we are strategically making more space for people to show up in their authentic selves. And so I think that that's how we start. We start by continuously making room and understanding that there's more than just one perspective. And although we may be teaching a particular perspective for 20, 30 years, let's just flip the coin over to see what's on the other side and have discussion, right? Because there may be something in that discussion that we had never thought of, or, that could help push us forward. I also think that technology is making me excited. All the different platforms in which we can get the word out, or our conversations. I think traditionally, if you were not part of the inner sanctum of the field, then your various opinions kind of fell to the wayside, or you felt like you were screaming out to the ocean. But now that you have, different platforms with social media, you can create your own blog space. You can have podcasts like these and be very intentional about your audience and what it is that you want to put out. So I thank you for putting this together and for reaching out to people who are doing the work. And it may be in less traditional spaces, but it still is the work, right? Of trying to make this field better and trying to make it more inclusive, so that no matter where you may find yourself, you see glimpses of yourself in bodies of work somewhere and feel like, okay, these people are trying to make us better and make sure that our voices are being heard. So I think that that's what's exciting me the most, is that people are getting more creative. I ran into someone who is a graphic designer and says, I'm interested in bioethics. And so in asking, okay, how do you come underneath the umbrella? And for them, when we talked about informed consent, there's so many people who may not share with you that they can't read or don't understand what it is that they're signing. I remember hearing a case study about a person who consented to amputation of a leg, and after being woken from surgery, was appalled that the leg was gone, just confused as to where is my leg. And so the staff was talking amongst themselves that you consented to this, so how do you not know? But it goes back to, does the patient actually understand? So what does it look like if we had graphics included into our informed consent that will show that this is what you're consenting to. You're consenting to have the leg removed, so the leg will be there in one picture, the leg will be gone in the next picture. The leg will also show how you may have difficulties, getting up flights of stairs, or a person with crutches, a person in a wheelchair, a person whatever. And so for the person that can't read, that still may not be able to, or still doesn't want to admit that to someone, whether it's a fear or whether it's something else, an anxiety, and behind that, we're ensuring that they understand and in their own way still participate in the conversation. So again, that was something I had never thought about. None of our textbooks talk about, we should add the graphic designers. But there was something about this particular person that they saw a place for themselves as to, this is how I can be useful and this is how I can push the conversation forward. And so these are the things that are exciting me right now, is that we're thinking in non-traditional ways of taking care of our communities and broadening the conversation at large.
Yeah, that is really exciting. And of course, just like any field, it's always a work in progress. And speaking about doing the work, we're interested in what you're doing. I know that you're still in the process of working on the Flexer report and sharing your particular lens on the different complexities in medical humanities as well as bioethics. But I guess I have a spoiler alert question here. Is there anything that we should be on the lookout for, what you're working on or what you're currently researching on that you'd like to publish in the future?
Sure. So I, again, shameless plug, am working with Mercer University School of Medicine. And our mission is that we are dedicated to educating the underserved in the rural communities. And so we usually only take students that come from rural communities because we understand by statistics they are more likely to go back into those communities to serve. And Georgia is about 40% rural areas. And so that is a great portion of the state. And so a lot of those areas, it may take them an hour, if not longer, to get to their nearest hospital or clinic. And so right now we're doing all our research about, how do we try to get more healthcare tools out to those particular areas. One of the studies that we are working on is how do they view organ donation? We know that as technology is advancing, we're starting to use organ donors for more and more things, but how does this community really view people in those situations? Are you in favor of organ donation or are you not? And for those who are in favor of it, do you want to be organ donors yourself? How do you look at that? And I think a lot of the literature that comes out when it comes to medicine and the thoughts and feelings of the general public, it tends to exclude this community. It's usually about a large population coming out of an urban area. And so I think it's important to know how these communities think about some of these ideas. And so one of the communities that we're thinking about going into is Hancock County, specifically Sparta, Georgia, which is almost in the middle of nowhere. And their hospital closed about 20 years ago, almost. And so for those citizens, they're having to travel almost an hour to get to healthcare services. So not only, when it comes to organ donation, but just in general, how are you making sure that you're staying healthy? If you have a medical emergency, where do you turn to? Right now, they do have a health department that is out in that area that is assisting them. But after 5 p.m., what do you do if you're having a heart attack? Where do we send you? And so those are the conversations that we're having. And so that's the research that we're kind of looking at, is just, healthcare issues around rural citizens. Because it's so important to us and I think to our nation that when we talk about healthcare for all, that we don't continue to exclude them from that particular conversation.
Yeah, really exciting work in the future. And of course, usually we focus on urban centers, not really the complexities that rural demographics face regarding, of course, space, place, how far they are to the particular resources they need, how far they are from the closest grocery store, for example, right? Food insecurity isn't just limited to urban areas, but also rural communities have their challenges as well. So exciting. That is really, I'm looking forward to, future papers that are being published so we could gain more insight on those particular communities. So thank you. It's been a pleasure, really a pleasure speaking with you, Dr. Carter, and we are in deep gratitude for sharing your thoughts about your experiences, but also about what you feel that needs to happen in order to equal the playing field, the equitable dynamics of bioethics. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me today. And again, thank you for this platform. I have enjoyed what you have done in the past, and I look forward to what you're doing in the future.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to another great conversation on bioethics in the margins. This podcast is hosted by Amelia Barwise and Kirk Johnson. Our producer is Elizabeth Chung. Our editor is Madeline Mahoney. Our theme music was written and produced by Pablo Cortes. We are grateful for the assistance of Wendy Jung, and Gargi Pandey is our creative director. Nicole Strand is our advisor, and Steven Sodecki is our senior advisor. Join us again next time.